afternoon, and welcome back to the Industry 4.0 and Sustainable Supply Chain stage here at CogX. I am Kat Keeley, CEO of Beep and founder of Frontline.live, and I am your MC for this stage, for this final day. It's been the most fascinating and insightful. There's been so many interesting conversations over the last couple of days, and I'm expecting the last two sessions to continue at that same level. Appropriately, after lunch, we're going to be talking about Industry 4.0 and the Great British Sandwich. I've just learned that the food and drink sector is by far the biggest sector in the UK. Food and drink has a massive influence on our environment, on our health, on our society. But there is a huge digital gap, and that means there's a massive opportunity. It was big before, and it's just got a lot bigger since COVID. So how can data change agriculture, the food industry, and how can it empower consumers? So without any further ado, let me hand over to Ben Ramsden, who is the Partnership Manager of Food and Drink for Digital Catapult.
Thanks very much. And yeah, we're delighted to talk to you today about the opportunities presented in the food and drink sector. It's a multi-layered, complex and resilient, intelligent system, which in recent times has proven itself to be resilient to shock. But what are the opportunities for advanced digital technologies to unlock these benefits? So we're going to have a great panel, but before we do have a panel, I'm just going to send a little poll out to everybody to ask you who you actually are. So if you can tell us as soon as you can in the poll, it'll help us to make sure we're framing our conversation to you guys. So on our panel, I'm very excited to be joined by three fellow panelists. We have Simon Pearson, who's the founding director of LIAT, the Lincoln Institute for Agri-Food Technology at the University of Lincoln. We also have Julie Pearce, who's the director of Openness and Data and Digital for the Food Standards Agency. And we have Scott Nelson, who's CEO and chairman of Sweetbridge, and a start and scale up organization that works very actively in the food and drink sector. So kicking off where we are, really food and drink, as we were just told, I mean, it's not just about the food on our plate, is it? I mean, Julie, could you tell us a bit about this, what are we talking about here in terms of the food system?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. So, yes, the food system, it is so important to every single person on the planet. It affects us 3 times a day. It sustains us and it can kill us. So it is vitally important to us. But it is also, as you said in the introduction, it's also very, very important from business point of view. A large number of people gain their income, their livelihood in working with food. Also, there are maybe less than immediately apparent aspects to food, and by that I mean both the cultural, sometimes the religious importance of food. So it really runs through everything that we're doing day by day by day. And what I'm hoping from this afternoon is we can really see how technology, data can really transform our relationship with the whole of the food system and understand what the case for that change really is.
Thanks, Julie. And obviously at the moment we all know that we've seen the empty shelves in the supermarkets and all of the challenges around wasted milk in the supply chain and much more. I mean, COVID-19, Simon, I mean, how do you feel that's how's the food system stood up? And does this present an opportunity or a threat for advanced digital technologies?
I think it's still maybe early days to say how well the food system has stood up. If we think here in the UK, half our food is imported. So we're not only thinking about the food that we're growing within the UK, we're also mindful of food that we will be needing to import over the coming months as the pandemic moves throughout the globe. So not yet through it. I think from my observations, I have been impressed by how well the system has stood up. It has proven to be extremely resilient, and some of the empty shelves may have been brought on by ourselves as in lockdown we changed our behaviour. And by that I'm not talking about stockpiling, because I think the vast majority of people weren't stockpiling, but they may be doing a bit more home baking, so putting more pressure on certain food items. But overall, the vast majority of people have had access to food. They may have had difficulty because they were shielding, or there are economic pressures that meant it hard to get access to food. But overall, I think the system did do amazingly well. Now, whether or not it did well enough, where it might have come to the brink, to the edge of breaking, I think there may be a number of points where that happened, and whether or not it is sufficiently resilient going forward through the pandemic, and also whether there may be other shocks that might be too much for it.
Absolutely. And so, Simon, I mean, what do you think? Do you think this presents an opportunity?
I agree with Julie. I think it's done remarkably well. If you look at it, if you try and step back to see what's happened, clearly, if you're in a supermarket, there's no food on the shelf. It's very distressing. But the additional volume of food that's been moved into the supply chain at incredibly high speed has been really very impressive. It's millions of tons of food have been moved very quickly. What's driving that? Well, I look at the food system as a very advanced cyber-physical system, and it's a combination of the amazing work done by millions of people, and in the UK alone, there's 4.5 million people who make a living out of the food industry, millions of people, and then all the digitals and the cyber systems, logistics systems which underpin it, and that they have worked. There's no doubt about it. They can always be better, and I think what we're understanding now is where it can be better. So that's the next stage. That's around speed of information, accuracy of information. It's been a lot of blackouts across the sort of information chain, the supply chain, and where food is. So there's pieces where we can definitely improve. As Julie says, I don't think we're not out of it yet. It's still early days. So I think the demand side has shown a very large amounts of resilience. I think what we've not seen yet is the impacts on the supply side, and clearly the obvious risks are sort of COVID transmission within food factories, on farms. That's seen in the US and Germany. That's an issue. And then you've got the longer term downstream effects in terms of sort of planting new crops and all those sorts of things. So we're not out of it yet. Very worried about what's happened in developing countries, because there's been logistic failures. So that those are vulnerable people. So we're in the wash, but the demand side, the cyber sides cope pretty well. Now, what I do, I look back quite recently to a supply chain issue in the UK with one fast food outlet that supplies chicken, and they allegedly changed their supply, their distribution network and digital network, and then couldn't deliver food to their restaurants. So we've had an example of a complete failure to deliver, which is widely in the press, in one restaurant, and then the whole food system, though, in this one has delivered pretty well. But what that shows to me is the vulnerability in the system. So if those systems fail, we have a problem. So we're not out in the woods, and there's lots to learn, and we need to make that system more resilient, particularly on the cyber side.
Absolutely. So we're basically talking about a really globalized system. It's deeply complex. It's also highly politicized, obviously, as we go, highly political, as we know, just by what's been happening in the last few months. And Julie, as you mentioned, is very cultural. and connected to who we are and the diversity of it in terms of the whether it's a small kebab shop or a massive global retailer, everybody's connected through this system. I mean, Scott, so given this complexity and given the robustness that the system has proven itself at the moment in light of COVID-19, even though there are some gaps and we're not yet out of it. I mean, Scott, what do you think is has COVID-19 presented an opportunity? Has it for businesses? Is it strengthening or weakening the business case for advanced digital technologies?
Well, it's going to strengthen it in the end, because even though the food supply chain has done very well, the opportunities for it to do better are significant. So a grocery store or outlet that is out of food can't make a sale, but has a customer that wants to buy something. So it has a revenue loss opportunity from that customer coming there. If you don't provide the material that somebody wants when they want it, as a supplier to somebody, say, making some kind of prepared food, you might change relationships that have been decades long to a new party, and that new party's relationship you might find satisfactory, and so you might not switch back. So the economic stakes here are very high, and the people that play the game better than others are going to be those who are in the best shape to basically adapt their business. And that means you have to have adaptive technology and information, because information is the new oil in our air. And the better you can utilize that information to make better decisions faster, to reposition your value chain so that you get things that you can't get from one place from another, and your ability to make those adjustments quickly offer huge economic gains over other people. And so the people that played this game well are going to survive and thrive. And the people that don't play it well are going to be left out because they won't be able to actually compete.
Absolutely, and here in many ways is the hub of a lot of the challenges, or the nub of a lot of the challenges, whether or not people are actually proficiently engaged in technology to be able to take advantage of the benefits. I mean, it's a sector with 95% of the companies in the food and drink value chain are SMEs. Julie, do you think the sector's ready to engage with these advanced digital technologies, and what needs to happen to make sure that the benefits are inclusive rather than exclusive?
I think the answer to that is yes, no, and partly. I absolutely in the yes, that's partly borne out by what we have observed through the pandemic. Those businesses that are using technology to be agile, they're the businesses that have really pivoted from their old business model to the new. That's one of their responses. So they may be very, very quickly opening up new channels, and also where the supply chain didn't work so well was where some of it was already locked in. So commodities were predetermined, milk being one of the classic examples, milk being predetermined to go to hospitality outlets, and trying to move it into retail proved to be really, really hard. And so there's an example there where many businesses have been very speedy, and I've just been amazed seeing what people can do in the matter of a couple of weeks, and equally surprised by some of those big old legacy systems where they work fine when it's very, very predictable, but trying to change them, modify what's going on. I think modern data, a more active, proactive, predictive analytics is what's needed. So I think yes, good in part, but the upside has been many examples of where it has worked well, and I think that then can form the basis for the case for change, where other businesses may think, yes, now I need to act, but I can really see the case for change now that was less clear before.
Yeah.
And if I could add one thing to that, I think that Julie's point about historic patterns of procurement being the place where there was a lot of problems. I would echo that the place where things haven't been that agile has actually been in changing relationships and finding new market opportunity.
Yeah.
And this is partly a tip of the iceberg problem. It's a much bigger problem that we can only see the tip of the iceberg on. And that is that a lot of this information, a lot of the systems are not integrated in a holistic business sense. They've been pursued for operational reasons, and typically by a single party who is the kind of gorilla in a value chain. So they're looking, and their pursuit has been, how do I become more efficient myself? How do I make my value chain function more resiliently or better? And I think that's what the lesson is that there's only so much you can do in creating operational efficiency if you don't also create administrative efficiency, financial efficiency, and other things that mean we have to integrate things that we haven't thought about integrating before, like contracting. Other things.
Absolutely. Gonzalo, you've got... Yeah, go.
So I think the other point I think I'd say is I think a lot of other industrial sectors can learn from the food sector as well. So if you think why has the food sector coped reasonably well on the retail side with COVID? One of the reasons is that the sector copes with enormous amounts of volatility and variability on a day-to-day basis. It's actually pretty hard to be a food producer. If you imagine, you don't know when if you're a farmer, you're going to sell it you're going to move it through this logistics chain, sell it to a food manufacturer, put it in another logistics chain. It'll go to a supermarket depot. It'll be ordered by a supermarket, put on a consumer shelf, and a consumer's going to buy it. You don't know how many consumers are going to buy your food. It's fresh. You've got a very short order cycle. Very, very hard to predict what's going on at that end. Also, if you're a farmer, you've got those other issues that you've got to face. The weather might change. Your crops might fail. The pest might come. So the day-to-day business in that food chain is incredibly volatile. And I think one of the reasons why the food chain's adapted well to COVID is because it copes on a day-to-day basis with extreme volatility. Now, I think if we can digitize that and get that working, that's a great place to be if you want to put digital technology in any other industrial sector. I'm sure there are other ones, but I can't think of a more volatile industry to play in with digital as an example. So it's a great place to be to start your tech, and then you can move it, I think, to other sectors. I would hope.
But I think I think you're absolutely right, that it does work pretty well, and to buy that sandwich or that meat pie or whatever, so many different organizations, companies, individuals, countries have been involved in the production of all of the ingredients that made up that product that you eat for your lunch without really thinking. So it is hugely complex, and it does work generally well. But if you can think about how it could work if it was undertaken in a more systematic, holistic way, with more data being made available to everyone through that supply chain, getting those feedback loops, understanding what is really going on. I'm particularly interested in ensuring the right information, the right data flows through with that sandwich in relation to its safety, in relation to its authenticity, in all of the ingredients, about allergens, all of that information needs to flow through every single ingredient that makes up that sandwich. So anything that can be done to allow all of the actors involved with that to just work better, I think produces a better quality product. Not only the quality of the sandwich that you buy and then eat, but all of the information that you need as a consumer wrapped around that sandwich. You, the consumer, you, the retailer, and everybody through the whole of that system. So I think there is a real need to do much more in all of that. And then the other aspect of this, which runs all the way through it, is waste. Yeah. So again, we're talking about the pandemic, but one of the still hasn't gone away is climate change, environment, and waste. So we just need to be really on that and looking to see what we can do to reduce that waste through the whole of that system.
Well,
it seems very much like what we've got is almost a new intention about how data can be sourced from within a supply chain. It's not just about the reputational risk of a product coming from a certain area and maybe the claim not being true for a consumer. It's also now, as you mentioned there, around waste, it's around climate, it's around ultimately optimizing the system. And obviously that presents a whole different world in terms of the world of certification and standards, but also in terms of unlocking the right incentives across the chain. When it comes to those incentives, I mean, first of all, one of the big challenges that people say is, well, why should I share my information? We've kind of talked a little bit about power. Scott, you were talking about the power dynamics in the supply chain. What's going to incentivize somebody to share that information? And Simon, from your perspective, how can this information be better governed? What are the big challenges around that?
So I think there's two drivers to share. One, it's public safety, which Julie will comment on. It's nobody wants to harm anybody when they sell food. It's just nobody wants to do it, and there's everybody's incentivized and legally required to share information when it comes to food safety, whether it's allergens or food poisoning, whatever. So that's a primary. There's a public good for sharing. The second thing, it's a commercial thing. It's optimizing the supply chain in whatever way to share, and so that's really very important. It's more knowledge and data in terms of what's going on in your supply chain. So that's really key. What we're trying to do at Lincoln is, and with the FSA, is really look at this notion of how do you facilitate sharing. And we're looking at the notion of data trust and data governance to try and underpin that, and the legal entities that's required to facilitate sharing. And I actually think sharing and the collaboration of data is actually the biggest barrier at the moment. So there's lots of data that should be shared that isn't shared, but we need a model, and we need a safe place and a legal structure to enable that sharing. And if we can unlock that, we'll unlock a lot more value within the supply chain. Sharing doesn't mean giving for free. Sharing means exchange and possibly even financial reward for sharing, but that still needs a governance mechanism in a complex system.
Thank you, Si, because that frames very neatly a big challenge, because a lot of people are terrified about their data being used against them, and whether it's providing the true information to a regulator or somebody else, and then being penalized for that, or them hiding it. That incentivizes fraud. These are all very complex challenges, which pieces of paper and standard auditing is not potentially the best way to do it. So, Scott, what opportunities does this represent from an advanced digital technologies perspective?
Well, there are two places that I'd like to kind of speak to on this. One is that the economics have to be adjusted a bit, because, as you've said, people can actually take advantage of data. They can take advantage of it in a way to monetize it without sharing the benefit. That's kind of easy to understand. But they can also take an advantage of it to basically create information asymmetry, which allows them to have access to more information than somebody else does, and make competitive decisions based on that allow them to extract more value than maybe they should out of relationships, or to increase their power in a power dynamic in a relationship. And so there has to be a rethink of how we run ecosystems economically in ways that are fair. Part of that's governance, but part of it is also structuring agreements differently. And then the other piece of this is technological. We do not need to share data always anymore in order to extract information from it. There are new paradigms. Obviously, Simon's mentioned data trusts. These are popular, but they have a weakness in that they create a honeypot. And we've had so many cases of people hacking into systems historically and being able to take information. And the problem with information is that once you possess it, you can copy it over the world anywhere you want, within moments. So it's not like stealing goods, which have a physical limit to how easy it is to move them. Data, once you get it, you can share anywhere and sell it many times. So other new paradigms of technology offer some very interesting opportunities here. These paradigms use code visiting data instead of data being aggregated to the place where the code is. And these enable you to ask questions without actually revealing any of the underlying information, such as, I do have 25 crates of lettuce that I can fulfill in an order without actually telling you that, well, actually I have 25,000 cases of lettuce, which maybe somebody doesn't really want to reveal, because that would create a situation where somebody could take advantage of that information. And so these are the kinds of things that are going to, that the good news is the technology exists to address these, but it requires us to think differently about the systems a bit. I don't think the technology is the challenge. I really don't. I really think the issue is economics. And the thing that's emerging is that these value chains are like complex ecosystems. Simon actually referred to this in his opening remarks. And these complex ecosystems need to be treated as an entity that you're part of and that you get some value out of. So in the existing environment, we compete firm to firm. And competing firm to firm in these complex ecosystems is actually not as profitable long-term as competing as ecosystems against other ecosystems. And you can get much greater optimization for all the parties. You can reduce food waste. You can prevent emission problems, other things, if the ecosystem operates as a organized entity than a bunch of separate players. But we don't really have the kind of commercial agreements, the procurement processes, the legal structures that allow that kind of stuff to happen. So this is a two-phase thing that has to happen together. There have to be advances in that legal space, in the legal sphere, and in the economics related to it that go along with the technology. And I think right now it's actually the economics and legal stuff that is the thing that is holding things back more than the technology.
Could I?
Technologists. Sorry, Julie.
Sorry, yes, absolutely agree with what you were saying there.
Sure.
I think the technology is not the problem, and even the availability of the technology and the cost of the technology has opened it up. So it in itself is not a blocker to engage, and so poor, impoverished farmers in Kenya are just as able to gain access to the data on their smartphones as anyone else, assuming they are allowed to engage and have access to be able to play. I absolutely agree. We need to step back and try and look at the world as ecosystem, and then a series of ecosystems, and understand how they work together. I think you're right about the economics and legal, and also there are organisations like mine, the regulator, the governance needs to be played into this, and also recognising, again, this is international, so this isn't solely within the gift of the UK government deciding how we'd like to organise ourselves. We need to be very mindful that these are international questions that we're grappling with, but anything that can be done to allow us to draw different pictures, think of the world in a different way, now is the time to be drawing those pictures.
COVID prevents us with the opportunity to gain a level of cooperation that will allow that to happen to a degree. Sometimes you need to shake things up a bit in order to be able to change rapidly, and things have been pretty shaken up.
Yeah,
absolutely. And related to that, so the farmer, the restaurant runner, all of the people within the supply chain who on this global value chain, how can we make sure that, for them, obviously they're burdened with many challenges around keeping the business running, sourcing the right things, also meeting the needs of regulation and standards, often embroiled with loads of different standards that they've got to comply to, and spending a huge amount of time on certification, audits, etc. How can these advanced digital technologies improve their perspective on, or their ability to meet standards and manage not only the legal and the economic challenges, but the certification challenges and the challenges around compliance? And Julie, how do you see that, and how does that shape the role of the FSA in the future?
I think the answer to that is in many levels, from the day-to-day automation, access to data to help run your own business, whether it's data you've generated yourself or data as to what's going on more widely in the sector, access to information, real-time transition of data, really cheap IoT sensors. There's so much that is available, and sometimes I think for many startups it may be actually easier than the traditional big organizations. I'm not being overly sympathetic to them, but the ones that are sitting on those big legacy systems and big legacy ways of thinking and behaving. So again, maybe the startups are in a better position. Also, from the regulator's point of view, what can we do? I think we need to be very mindful of organizations trying to operate in that way. We need to be making sure that we're not adding to the burden, we're not adding friction into the whole of the process. So we need to be mindful of that. And then making sure, as we start to think about this wider world of these ecosystems, we are playing those small businesses into our ecosystems. We're not just rebuilding the world around a series of the big players. We need to conceptually have all actors are in there.
Absolutely, thanks, Julie. And so Scott, for the companies who are these small companies, and they've seen the headlines around Cambridge Analytica and other things where as consumers we've seen our data being used against us to change the way that we've all read the headlines. How if we're able to have a system around governance of our data, how can we really ensure that the benefits go back to the people, and that the new startups that Julie mentioned are really in a really excellent place to make the most of the opportunities, aren't going to become these extractive vehicles that extract value from the value chain rather than help to the value chain to regenerate? What needs to
at the end of the day, there's a lot of pieces that need to happen for all that to occur. At the end of the day, it all boils down to having shared ownership.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have a common ownership, you are going to always be afraid of what is going to happen to the information and how it might disadvantage you.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a common ownership where you basically can profit from the use of the information, then that starts to weaken that. So,
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about governance that's needed. There's technical solutions that are needed. The technical stuff pretty much exists, although it's not wide in use yet. It will become far more, for many other industries need it too. So it's going to become much more common over the next 5 years. Governance stuff, though, I think we still tend to think too hierarchical and too centralized, even in governance. There are lots of ways that you can share value and govern complex things that can be done in a much more decentralized fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And in order for the systems to be trusted, people are going to need to be able to bond together in affinity groups that they choose, not that they're forced upon them. At the end of the day, regardless of the technology, trust comes out of relationships, and relationships come from working with people that you have confidence in and that you believe in and that are doing something that makes sense to you. And that actually would be good. That would be very good for society. And so allowing adaptive systems and this is where technology can really shine. It allow people to participate in choices. You think of it as voting or polling, but where people can participate and have a voice and know that their voice is heard, and group together into groupings that then that also group together in larger groupings, kind of in a virtual version of what you see in towns and cities and governments, countries and whatnot. I think that's what will happen. And until that happens, I don't think we'll have an ability to have people feel confident, because there's just too much fear. If you're not dealing with people you trust, and you can give all sorts of assurances, all those other things, but at the end of the day, trust is a gut thing. And you're talking about small businesses. I mean, they make up the vast majority of the sector, and they don't have a lot of time to figure stuff out. And today they do things because they're expedient in many cases. They do things. But if you look at the food sector, a very large percentage of the food sector doesn't even have contracts with one another. And it's because because of what Simon said, that this is an environment that is in chaos all the time. And you have to work with parties that have your back, because everything is always going wrong. And so if we don't recognize that creates a fabric of trust that we need we need technology to map and leverage, but technology will not replace it. Governance won't replace it. What we need is to take those things and allow those relationships to form groups that can police their data and can control it, and then can share it with larger groups, but which have an ability to share economically in the benefits that can be created. We've actually done some economic models of this, and the amount of value that could be unlocked in the food chain is actually in the order of magnitude of 5 to 10% of the size of the market. And that's a multiplier on the average profitability of the players. So you're not talking about a 10% improvement in profit. You're talking about multiples of profitability that are available. Well, that won't happen if everything is extractive, as you said. Will only happen if things aren't extractive, and the only way that's going to work is people working in trust relationships with one another.
And that we've talked about the pandemic, and we've talked about food, and we've talked about technology, and how those things have been knocked and maybe changed by the pandemic. But maybe what it is also doing, and this might be the most important thing, is the shift in people's perception, their trust, who they now trust, their attitudes to each other, and it's something that we as people, as individuals, and then we as nations, we as businesses, or however we choose to identify ourselves, but we've all been through it at the same time, and maybe it's that will go through, and it's that which will change things going forward. So it's not the technology on its own, but maybe it's that shift in trust and attitudes and understanding and willingness to engage with a different model.
Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. I think there will be titanic changes in relationships as a result of how people were treated in a crisis. They will remember.
Yeah,
and so all of this is, so thank you, because I think it's difficult. Well, it's good to see everybody agreeing, but sometimes it's nice to get us arguing with each other. But I think we were going to generally agree on this. But one of the big challenges around this is big. What we're talking about, just bringing it back to the scope and scale of the food system that we've talked about. We talked, as you say, about many different things, but ultimately it's not just a food system that's going to be born from an optimized and open interoperable food system that's going to be born from the advance of new digital technologies, but a different way of engendering, building and enabling trust and community across value chains, not just in the UK, but globally. But Simon, I mean, what role do you think the UK has here in terms of, and what are the kind of, we have a great reputation for research and development. What is the opportunity that this all presents, the research and development community, our innovation community across the country? What can we do to come together and make the most of this?
Yeah, I think the UK's got some amazing assets. I mean, the not just in the academic community, but it's got world-leading retail systems, world-leading logistics. It's international trade, so it's pulling in food from all nations at very, very high speed. So it's a big, very professional entity that we can build on, and then I think world-leading academia around it as well. So you know, we've got some big challenges to think about in the future: the governance piece, the trust piece, which has been elaborated on, but also the cyber resilience of the system. Quite clearly, that you know, there's some vulnerabilities around that we need to think about. We need to think into the future. No government's going to allow anything like this, the pandemic response, happening again. So they need to think about where national infrastructure is vulnerable, and food's one of those things. So there's going to be a big piece of that, and then new technologies as well. And we've done. We're very good at machine learning, AI, but as Scott mentions, private enhancing technologies for data sharing. Those are the technologies of the future, and a lot of those are still coming out of the university sector. And so I'm proud of what we've done in this sector, and I do think there's lots of opportunity in the future.
And I was, and also connected to the university sector is the research community, of which the Catapults and the Agri-Tech centres are part of. And obviously, there's a great opportunity for us all to come together to start to really energise these the technologies, enable them to come into the sector and build these amazing communities of resilience that we've been talking around. We've only got one more minute left. I think if you were going to say 5 words, is that a worthwhile thing? 5 words around that would frame the opportunity in this multi-layered, digitalized food system. What would they be?
Change equals opportunity.
8% of world global trade is food related. So it's not just a UK thing, it's massive global opportunity.
And Julie?
Something around opportunity for transformation, for people, remembering all of the people we've been talking about, whether in business or consumers, it's about people.
Yeah. Excellent. So basically we're saying it's time for the tech community to sink its teeth into the great British sandwich and this massive opportunity for the food and drink sector. Join us in the next 15 minutes. I think we've got a Q&A. We only had 24% technologists, 12% academia, 8% of the audience was food and drink, and the rest were other. So we look forward to having your questions and talking about other things than we have been just now. I think this is now the end.
Fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, Ben. I've just learned a lot about a sector that I hadn't yet deep dived into. Obviously, I've learned a lot about the supply chain around PPE since we set up Frontline.live. But it's interesting that the food supply chain is brimming with the same massive opportunities and blocked by the same challenges. It's not technology and technologists that stand in the way of evolution. Yeah, regulation and governance needs to catch up. It needs to be more fit for purpose. We need better policies, not just in the UK, but across the connected globe. As with the PPE, decentralized models are the way forward to be able to respond rapidly to change. But as the great panelists were saying, nothing's going to change unless all of this is underpinned with transparency and trust. And that's the only way forward. We're going to into a resilient future. So thank you again, Ben. The Q&A will start in 15 minutes. So I'll hand you over to that, and I'll see you for the last panel here soon.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.